Now what I'd like to do is go ahead and move to our next panel. As Ed Hickey talked about, the theme of our overall policy summit is the midpoint in the decade of the kidney and reprioritizing patients across policy, regulatory, and payment decisions. And that's why I'm very pleased that our next panel will start to talk about things about protecting kidney patients and organ donor health, the policy opportunities that are available in 2025. And we're joined by a very distinguished group of individuals who have committed themselves professionally and personally to efforts that are a like cause with AAKP. We have Parker Reynolds, who's an associate at Holland and Knight. She's a policy representative for the Public Access to Sunscreen Coalition, a very important issue for any patient that is immunosuppressed. And right now, what I'd like to do is move to Parker Reynolds. Parker, Charlotte is on immunosuppressive drugs for her heart transplant. I'm on immunosuppressives. Many of the folks that are watching us are on immunosuppressive medications that go with transplants, and it makes us more susceptible to skin cancer. And I want you to talk about the sunscreen legislation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, just to echo my other panelists, thank you to AAKP for putting together this wonderful panel and just for highlighting the importance of advocacy and the role that coalitions play in that process. So again, I'm Parker Reynolds, representing the Public Access to Sunscreens Coalition. The PASS Coalition, for short, is a multi-stakeholder group of public health organizations like AAKP, healthcare providers, sunscreen manufacturers, and concerned citizens that all came together in 2012 to advocate for Americans to have access to the latest sunscreen technology and to address the backlog of sunscreen ingredients that were pending before FDA. So we have worked for years collaboratively with the FDA, HHS, Congress, and other stakeholders and policymakers on public policy issues to advance that mission. As Paul mentioned, this is particularly relevant to this audience because kidney patients who have had transplants or are immunocompromised are particularly at risk. Paul can keep me honest here, but I think those who have had a transplant or are immunocompromised are up to 100 times more susceptible to contracting skin cancer. And more broadly, skin cancer is the most common cancer in the US, with more people diagnosed each year than every other cancer combined, which is a pretty crazy fact and figure. And while diagnosis and treatment of skin cancer in the US continues to rise, it's actually on the decrease in other countries. So now I want to turn to why that is and why we have such risk and prevalence of skin cancer in the US. The last time the FDA approved a new sunscreen active ingredient was before the invention of the iPod. You heard me right, iPod, not iPhone. So we're currently on iPhone 15 or 16, whatever it is, and yet we still have not had any new sunscreen active ingredients introduced since the 1990s. And that's not to say that the sunscreen active ingredients that we have on the market do not work, but it does mean that Americans in the United States currently do not have access to the latest technology. And that is while the rest of the world is 1, 2, even 3 generations ahead of where we are in the United States. And it's not for lack of trying. Since 2002, there have been 8 new sunscreen active ingredients that have been approved around the rest of the world for use, that have been submitted to the FDA for consideration, but are currently stuck within the FDA's regulatory process and have stalled and have ultimately not been brought to market. When we first began advocating for better access to the newest sunscreen technologies in 2012 when the coalition was founded, the FDA pointed to the burdensome and time-consuming nature of the regulatory process as the key problem for preventing new ingredients from coming to market. In 2014, the PASS Coalition advocated for a bill called the Sunscreen Innovation Act. It was legislation that Congress unanimously passed to streamline the approval process for sunscreen active ingredients. The SIA, for short, Sunscreen Innovation Act, was intended to replace this cumbersome notice and comment rulemaking process with a more efficient administrative order process that we now have in order today. However, because of the FDA's implementation of that process, we still do not have any new sunscreen active ingredients that have been brought to market. To put a finer point on it, FDA has required a testing methodology in the consideration of sunscreen active ingredients that was never used for active ingredients in the past, and it has been found to be unworkable for sunscreen manufacturers. On top of that, the FDA currently requires manufacturers to use animal testing, putting the United States at odds with the agreements that companies have made in order to bring their products to market in other markets across the world, like the EU, that requires them to promise not to use animal testing. So that brings us up to speed to where we are today. To solve for this problem and reduce the backlog of sunscreen active ingredients that we currently have, the PASS Coalition has worked hand in glove with the co-chairs of the House Skin Cancer Caucus, which includes Representatives John Joyce, Dave Joyce, Debbie Dingell, and Deborah Ross, bicameral and bipartisan, who recently introduced the Supporting Accessible, Flexible, and Effective Sunscreen Standards Act, Safe Sunscreen Standards Act for short. And yes, ChatGPT did come up with the name, I'll be honest about it. And this is legislation that seeks to amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to maintain high safety standards while providing flexibility for evaluating the safety and efficacy of sunscreen active ingredients. So in particular, the bill would allow for the use of real-world evidence, observational studies, and other non-animal testing methodologies to be used when evaluating sunscreen active ingredients. The legislation is, the whole point of it is to ensure that Americans have access to safe and effective sunscreens, but also to align with international standards and foster innovation in the sunscreen development space. This is in particularly a timely effort in light of the upcoming over-the-counter monograph user fee reauthorization. For those who are unfamiliar, this is a 5-year user fee program for over-the-counter drugs, and it's set to expire in September 30th of this year and will have to be reauthorized before that point. So Congress is going to be working through this process of reauthorizing that program for the remainder of the summer. And it is through our partnership with our public health groups like AAKP that the coalition currently has had a lot of success in having that bill be considered for the AMUFA reauthorization. We've had a lot of hopeful conversations and are really confident that advocacy efforts like what AAKP is doing will really help get that bill ultimately passed in both the House and Senate.
Thank you very much, Parker. And again, for those who are watching, the importance of protecting patients once they're transplanted is almost as important sometimes as the opportunity to transplant. Charlotte is a fantastic example of that, and so many of the patients that are there today and across the country watching know this to be true. Parker, a fast question for you. You've come out of the House of Representatives. You spent time there. What is it like when your patient comes in to advocate for something from a professional staff standpoint? Ray has seen this in the Senate also. But in your experience, what's the impact that a patient voice has across the table from an elected leader or from a senior staffer?
I think it is critical. Now be on the other side of the ledger as a lobbyist, I can say something till I am blue in the face, but it holds so much more weight when it comes with a personal story and a localized story for a member of Congress or their staff to be able to really have a face with a bill, and it makes it personal to that member of Congress.
Okay, thank you very much, Parker.